Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Montague here. In our last video, we covered Unit 4, Lesson 10, Functions Practice, but we only did bubbles 1 through 7. So I'm here on the same lesson on code.org, still Unit 4, Lesson 10, Functions Practice. But in this video, we're going to do the last few bubbles, which I usually have my students work on independently, which is why I put these in separate videos. But I'm here on bubble 8. We're going to be covering 8A, B, and C. And then I'll talk about the information on bubble 9, which is just an informational bubble. And then bubble 10 is a check for understanding question, so we won't go over that one. That'll be up to you to figure out. All right, but let's start with bubble 8A, this ticket prices app, which is one that we've seen before from a previous lesson. Specifically, I believe this was in our variables practice. So the way that this worked with our variables practice lesson, we were just making the child and senior buttons work when we sold a ticket. And we're essentially doing the same thing here, but we need to also incorporate a function, all right? So it tells us up here that one button already has working code inside of it, which is our adult ticket button. And then the other two buttons work similarly. And it says rather than repeated code, try creating an update screen function that we can call inside each on event. So it says to run the program, see how it works. All right. So when we run it, obviously our adult ticket is going to work. Okay. We can add adult tickets. But our child ticket and our senior ticket aren't going to do anything right now because we don't have those buttons coded. So I'm just going to reset it. All right, and it says read the code for the adult button carefully. Decide which lines of code belong in an update screen function. Then we're going to declare that update screen function at the bottom of the code and add in any code that we think needs to run inside each button. And then we need to also make the child and senior buttons fully work, so they'll increase the total number of tickets sold and the total money collected. And we will need to call that update screen function for all three of these ticket options. So let's tackle it from the first part where we are looking at the working adult button, and we need to decide which lines of code belong in the update screen function. All right, so we have our variables for tickets and dollars. So that's our total number of tickets and our total amount of money collected, essentially. And then our variables for adult price, child price, and senior price. So when we click on the adult ticket button, it adds 1 to our ticket count using that counter pattern with variables. And it also adds our existing dollar value plus the adult ticket price, which we see in the variable is stored as $12.50. So each time we click that button, it adds $12.50 to our running total of dollars made. All right, and then it really is pretty easy because it tells us right here that this is part of what should be an update screen. They've got a comment in here on line 14 that says update screen. So that should give us a clue, right? All right, so right now they have if tickets is greater than or equal to 20. It sets the property of the sold out label, which you see here across the middle, the sold out label, to become visible. And then it also sets the property of the dollars label to show our dollar value we've earned, and the tickets label to show the total number of tickets sold. And then we also have the play sound that happens when you click on any of the given buttons. So I know that this is all going to have to be in an update screen. And then our child button and senior button codes are completely blank. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add in the function at the very bottom for the update screen that we are going to be adding. All right, so I've named the function update screen. And I'm going to put in a comment that says this function will update the screen whenever you click any button. Okay, so that's what this function is doing. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do, I think the easiest way, I'm going to switch to text mode to make it a little easier to copy and paste. And I'm going to copy line 15 all the way through line 20, right? Because I know from this comment in the adult ticket button that this is the stuff that needs to be in my update screen. So I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go down into my function, and I'm just going to paste all of those lines of code. All right, and then I can go back up here and just completely get rid of lines 15 through 20 out of the adult ticket button, because instead of putting those lines of code in there, we are going to call our update screen function. All right, so right now our update screen function will still check if we've had enough number of tickets to be sold out. It will update our dollar and our ticket display on the screen, and it will also play the sound. So that's what's happening every time we call this function. And we know we are going to need to put a function call up here in the adult ticket. All right, so I'm going to put my update screen function call with the call a function block into my adult ticket price, so it ends up on line 15 for me with how my spacing worked out. All right, so it still should do the same thing that it did before, right? We're just putting all of that information into our function instead of having to rewrite the code for the child button and then rewrite the code again for the senior button. All right, so I also know I'm going to need to call this function inside my child button, so I'm going to go ahead and put in an update screen call. And I'm also going to need to call this function inside my senior button. So I'm going to put an update screen call in here as well. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and run the program just to see what happens. So when I run it, I click on my adult ticket, right? That was the one that was working in the first place. And we see it's still working. It's still adding to my ticket count and my dollar count when I click it. All right, and I'm going to click on the child ticket. And it makes the noise, but it's not updating my dollar amount, and it's not updating my ticket total either. And same with the senior ticket. All right, and that is because we didn't put in our variable updates yet. All right, so we see in the adult button we have our tickets is going up by 1 each time we sell an adult ticket, and our dollars is going up by the adult ticket price every time we sell an adult ticket. So we need to account for those variable updates for the child button and the adult button as well. All right, so if I just put the update screen function in there without doing these variable updates you see on line 11 and 12, it's not going to actually recognize that anything has changed with our ticket prices, because the only thing in the update screen function is setting the property to display those variable values. Right? If I don't update the variable values, it's going to display what's already been stored in there because we haven't made any updates to it, if that makes sense. All right, so what I need to do for this child button, all right, I need to also do the increased tickets sold and dollars collected here from lines 11 and 12. All right, so again, I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to switch to text mode, and I'm going to copy lines 10. I'm actually going to copy lines 10 through 14 just because I want that comment on line 14. All right, so I'm going to copy those lines, and then within my child button, all right, I've got my update screen function call here. I'm going to also just go ahead and paste this code to increase the tickets sold and dollars collected. And I'm going to paste the same thing down here in our senior button. I'll try and add a little bit more spacing here. All right, so before my update screen in my senior button, I'm going to, again, paste this same code, all right, because we are still wanting to update our ticket count and update our dollar count based on the tickets purchased. All right, but I still have this issue up here with my yellow triangle showing me that my child price has been defined and my senior price has been defined, but neither of these have been called in our program. All right, and that is because we do have to make some edits to what we copied from line 12. So on line 12, we take our total amount of dollars plus our adult price, and we copied it. So it's doing the adult price for the child button and the adult price for the senior button as well. So we need to change those to the child price and the senior price, so we are getting the appropriate amounts added to our dollar values. All right, so for the child button, obviously, I'm just going to change it to child price is what's being added. Okay, so that was our variable that was created on line 5, so it's $8.50 for the child, and then the $10 senior price on line 6 that we created is going to go in the senior button ticket down here. So we put in senior price. All right, And then we don't need to change anything about adding one to our tickets each time, because it doesn't matter if it's a child ticket or if it's a senior ticket, right? It still counts as a ticket that was sold. All right, so that should do it for what we need. That will update our variable values, and then it will also update the screen. And let's go ahead to reset, run the code, and make sure that it is actually working. All right, so when I click on the adult ticket, we've still got it adding the tickets. Now when I click on the child ticket, all right, it has added my child price and also increased my ticket count. All right, and then when I click on the senior ticket, right, it's again, sorry for the bell, adding the senior price of $10 and adding one to my ticket count. All right, so now we have our counts actually updating and our screen updating using that update screen function we just created. All right, the last thing I want to do here before we move on is double check that the conditional statement about our number of tickets sold is actually working. So we need to get up to 20 tickets before it will tell us that we're sold out. And I want to do mostly child and senior tickets for this, so I can see that the update screen function is working for both of those as well to get that sold out message, which it is. All right, and then I can, of course, keep clicking on the buttons because there's no mechanism to say we can't buy any more tickets. But it does give us that sold out message when we hit 20. So we should be good to go. And that's all we need to do is find that repeated code from the adult button that was already created and just get it added to our child button and our senior button. All right, so make sure you click on finish on this bubble, and we're going to go to bubble 8B, this basketball stats app. And if you are somebody like me who doesn't know anything about any sports ball, anything, this one might be a little bit confusing from the jump, but it's actually not too crazy once you get into it and really figure out what you're supposed to be doing. All right, so let's look at the instructions closely on this one. So it says this app is meant to help someone track some of the statistics associated with the game of basketball. And it's got a link that we can learn more. It gives us the basketball statistics Wikipedia page, which, sorry, I'm not really concerned with learning more about basketball statistics, so I'm just going to do what code.org tells me to do on this one. All right, so some of the buttons already have working code inside of them. Other buttons will work very similarly. So rather than write repeated code, we want to practice creating any functions that we can call inside of onEvents to make all of the buttons work correctly. All right, so it says run the app to see how it works. Of course, that's always the first thing we do, and we want to make sure to click all the buttons. All right, so when I run the app, all right, all of my stats are initially set to 0, and I have these different buttons on the court that represent different shots that you can take to either make or miss your basket. All right, so we've got in green, I believe, are the 3-point shots, and then blue are anything that's not a 3-point shot. All right, so I'm going to click on this green button over here first, and it does nothing. All right, none of the blue. Ooh, that blue button works. Okay, so I can click that blue button. When I click on make for that blue button, all right, it changes my FG%, whatever that is, to 100, and it gave me 2 points because that's a 2-point shot. All right, that button doesn't work. That button doesn't work. That button doesn't work. That one does. And let's say we missed that shot. Okay, so it took our, oh, that changed for my 3-point shot from over here. This one is also working. We get the make or the miss options here. And so that changes my FG% and my 3-point FGA stat changed to 1 for that last click that I made. All right, if I say I make my 3-point shot, all right, it increases my FG% again, increases the total points that we've made, my 3-point FGA and my 3-point FGM. Again, whatever those stats mean, who knows? I don't know, but you might know. All right. So we can see that we have a few buttons, at least 4 of them, that we will need to make work, but we have 2 buttons that are working all right now. All right. So it says read the code under the 3-point button and the mid-range button and decide which lines belong in a function. And then we need to declare that function using a descriptive name. And then add code to make the other 2-point and 3-point buttons work, including calling the function that we just declared. Okay, so it tells us to look at the 3-point button, which is this one right here. Okay, the 3-point button is on line 11. And then look at the mid-range button, which if we scroll down a little bit in our code, on line 23, we have the mid-range button. Okay, all that looks like it's happening in the mid-range button is that it's showing the elements to show those make and miss buttons down here at the bottom, and it's also showing the shot label right here. All right, because those aren't there on the screen unless we've clicked on one of these shot locations on the court to determine if a shot was made and they made it or missed it. Okay, so we need these buttons basically to display so we can say if it was made or missed shot for that. All right, and then the same thing for the 3-point button, right? It's doing the exact same thing. It's showing us the make and miss buttons, and it's showing us the shot label. The only other difference here is that we have this 3-point shot is set to equal true because that's going to obviously affect the 3-point stats like a 2-point shot would not affect. Okay, so the 3-point shot needs to be set to true, obviously, for 3-pointer shots on the court. But then our show elements, our 3 show elements in line 13 through 15 match the show elements in line 24 through 26. So I can tell right now I'm going to want to make a new function down here. Okay, it says declare a function that will allow all the shot buttons to work without repeating code unnecessarily. All right, so that's where I'm going to put my first function. And that is going to be for those 3 show elements that we saw before. And rather than naming this update screen, I want it to be more specific because this is specifically showing me the screen elements that I need to see. All right, so I'm going to name this show elements. Oops, if I can spell it right. All right, show elements is going to be my function name here. All right, and then I can go up to, I'm going to go ahead and look at our 3-point button. So on line 11, our on event for our 3-point button. Again, I'm going to switch to text mode, and I'm just going to copy lines 13 through 15, and then I'll get rid of them within my 3-point button. And I'm going to go down here and paste them within my new show elements function that I have created. All right, so inside my show elements function here, we should be able to see the make button, the miss button, and the shot label whenever we click on any of these given buttons. All right, so we have this little triangle that says show elements is defined, but we haven't been called in our program. So obviously we know we need to put our function calls in. All right, so I'm going to scroll all the way back up to our 3-point button because that's where I stole the code from and got rid of it up there. So I know I'm going to need a function call in here to show my elements. All right, and this is another 3-point button here for this on event on line 16. This is our corner 3-point shot. All right, so I know I'm going to need another variable update in here to change my 3-point shot to equal true because this is a 3-point shot on the field. All right, so you could copy and paste. I just went ahead and pulled in that variable update block. So I'm doing the exact same thing here from line 12 for our on event for the 3-point regular 3-point button. All right, for our corner 3-point button, we're doing the same thing. We're setting that 3-point shot to be equal to true. And then I know, again, I'm going to need to call that function to show my elements. Sorry for the bell. To show my elements again, because if we remember when we clicked on this little corner 3-point shot button over here, the make and the miss buttons weren't showing. So putting this in here should make it show when I click on this. So let's test it real quick. Yes, now I have the make and the miss options when I click on this corner 3-point shot, just like I did when I clicked on the regular 3-point shot. All right, and then we have our mid-range button. So this is the one that had already been coded as well to show those elements. So our other working button on the screen. But I'm going to get rid of these 3 show elements that are within that on event for the mid-range button on line 22. And I'm going to replace those with a function call, same function call we just created to show elements. All right, I'm going to need to do the same thing for the layup button, the same thing for the left elbow button, and the same thing for the right elbow button, right? Because we need to show those elements for every single possible shot on the court. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and drag in our function calls into each of these on events. And each of these is going to be the show elements function that we just created. Okay, so I'm putting in show elements. Ooh, not shoe elements, show elements. All right, show elements function calls for all of these buttons. So now at this point in time, it doesn't matter what button I click. Any of them should give me the make or miss options, right? So all of our buttons now pop up that make or miss option. We're just making all our shots as we test. All right, so all of those buttons, all of those possible shots from the court areas now show those elements so we can determine if it was a made shot or a missed shot. All right, so let's reset that. All right, so we've declared our function and we have added the code to make the other 2 and 3-point buttons work using that function we just declared. Okay, I had a student come in with a question, so I got a little bit lost. Anyway, we just made sure that all of the make and miss buttons are showing, and we can specify a make or miss for each of the shots on the different parts of the court. Okay, next part, it says to look at the make and the miss button and decide which lines belong in a function, because obviously our stats are being updated if we click on make or if we click on miss. All right, so something's happening when we click on those 2 buttons, and we have those on events down here. So on line 39 for me, it might show a little bit different for you if your spacing's a little bit different. But on line 39, we have the make button. So when we click on the make button, if it's a 3-point shot, so if our 3-point shot has been set to true, right, it's going to look at all of these totals and do the math for us to change those totals for these different stats. All right, and then it's going to change 3-point shot to false, right, because we don't need 3-point shot to be true until we click on one of those 3-point shot buttons. All right, so it just changes it back to false, which should be the default for the 3-point shot option. All right, if it's not a 3-point shot, so if 3-point shot is false initially, it's going to just look at the total FGA and total FGM and not change anything about the 3 FGA and 3 FGM variables. All right, and then we have this call to a function called update points and a call to a function called update FG info. And then we have hide elements for the make button, the miss button, and the shot label, right? Because once we click on the make or the miss button, those buttons disappear until we click on our next court shot. All right, so all those elements get hidden until we're ready to show them again. All right, so let's look at the miss button because we know there's going to be some repeated code in here. All right, so our miss button, again, has a conditional statement. And if 3-point shot is true, it's going to update the total FGA and the total 3 FGA. And it's going to, again, set 3-point shot back to its default state of false. If it's not a 3-point shot, so if 3-point shot is false, it will just change the total FGA and not look at the 3-point FGA statistic. So that is slightly different on the conditional here, right? So this conditional has a few other things that are happening in it, and this one doesn't have quite as much that's happening in it. So I would say these are not repeated code because it's not exactly the same conditional that we're looking at. Then we do have repeated code outside of that conditional because we have another call to the function update points. So we can see that on line 51 and also on line 67. And then we also have on line 52 the update FG info, and then line 68 also has that update FG info. So we have calls to these functions. That is actually repeated code. And then we have the hide elements again. All right, so we've clicked either make or miss, and then it hides those elements for us. So I would say that the two function calls, the update points and the update FG info function calls, as well as these hide elements, so that's 5 lines of repeated code within this make button and the miss button. So I think it's pretty clear we're going to have to add another function to do all those things for us. All right. So let's see what we have here. We have a at the bottom, okay, it says to declare an additional function that helps reduce repetitive code from the make and the miss buttons. All right, so we're going to put in a new function. All right, and my new function, I am going to add, I'm going to call this one make miss. I'm just going to call it make miss. That's what I'm going to call it. All right, so I've defined a function called make miss. All right, and within that function, I'm going to copy and paste these 5 lines of code from either the make or the miss button clicks. So I'm just going to go from the miss button click down here, and I'm going to copy from line 67 all the way through line 71. All right, I'm going to get rid of those lines up here within that section of my code. And then I'm going to just paste them down in this make miss function that I created. All right, so I'm going to switch back to block mode after I do that so we can see those 5 lines of code are now in my make miss function. All right, and then I've deleted them from my miss button, so I'm going to put my function call in here to call my make miss function. And then I'm also going to get rid of those lines up here in our make button click on event, and I'm just going to replace those with the same function call to our make miss function that we just created. All right, so that takes care of the repeated code that we were able to identify in our make and our miss button. All right, so after we do that, our final instruction here is to look for other opportunities to incorporate additional functions. And I don't see, honestly, any other opportunities to incorporate any other functions. We already have, I think, just about as much as we can incorporated into functions, just creating those 2 that we've already created. I know code.org, their actual solution that they recommend is a little bit different than what I have coded here. They actually create a function called update stats and includes these 2 update points and update FG info function calls within that update stats function they create. And then they have a separate function for hide buttons. So then when we're looking at our make miss up here, they actually have 2 function calls instead of just the make miss that we created just now. They have the update stats function call and then the hide buttons function call as well. But I just put all of those into one function, right? Because those 5 lines repeated, so I didn't see any reason to make them into 2 separate functions for no reason, basically. And I think that that's a good bubble to just highlight the fact that you can, in fact, put calls to other functions within a function. So we've got kind of some nested functions here. So our make miss function actually calls the code from 2 existing functions that were in here, this update points function and this update FG function, are called within the make miss function. So you can call another function inside of a new function that you create, like we see here in lines 91 through 93 with those function calls within this make miss function. But as far as I'm concerned, that is it for this bubble. We have taken care of any of the repeated code, and we have all of our function calls in here. So the last thing that we need to do is just test real quick. So when we run the program, we can click on any of our shots. I'm going to go through and I'm going to click on each of these shots twice, and I'm going to click that they made one shot and that they missed the other shot, because I want to make sure that my stats are actually changing as they should based on missed and made shots. So I do see my points and my FG percent changing. And then on my 3-point buttons, my 3-point FGA and my 3-point FGM is also changing. So it looks like everything is good. And we will go ahead and move on to bubble number 8C. All right, so bubble 8C is another bubble that we've seen before. It is our hydration tracker. And again, this is one that we saw, I believe, in the variables practice lesson, where you were coding the bottle button, the running workout button, and the weightlifting workout buttons to work. And essentially we're doing the same thing here, but now we are going to incorporate a function into these to make sure that they are all working as they should. Again, just kind of like the ticket app that we looked at in 8A, we have one button working and the rest of the buttons don't have any of the code in them. So we need to add some code to make all of these buttons work. And it says we're going to keep track of how hydrated we are. One of the buttons has working code inside of it. The other three will work very similarly. So rather than writing the repeated code, we're going to practice creating an update screen function that we can call inside each on event. All right, so it says to run the program, see how it works, read the code for the cup button carefully, and decide which lines of code belong in an update screen function. We will then declare the update screen function at the bottom of the code and add in any code that we think we'll need to run inside each button. So it says to add the code to make the bottle, the running, and the weights buttons work, and they should increase or decrease the total amount of water and increase either the total number of cups or the total number of workouts. And we will make sure that we call our update screen function where necessary. And it says note to the units for numbers used for the variables cup, bottle, running, and weights is ounces of water. So if there are 8 ounces in 1 cup. We are going to look first at our cup button. All right, because we've seen this before, right? When we click on cup, it increases our total cups of water and increases our total water count. All right, changes nothing about workouts because drinking a cup of water is not a workout. So for our on event for our cup button, when we click it, it changes our cups consumed to increase by 1, right? Because 8 ounces is 1 cup. All right, so our cups consumed is equal to cups consumed plus 1. Again, that's our counter pattern with variables. And then it also changes our total water to add the total existing water value and adds our cup to it. So 8 ounces of water gets added each time we click on that cup button. All right, and then again, like it did for our ticket app, it tells us that this is basically where our update screen needs to be. So it's got the set property for our water label to show our total water with ounces next to it. It has our cups label to show our total cups consumed, plus the word cups next to it. And our set property for our exercise label to show our total number of workouts, plus the word workouts next to it. And then finally, our play sound for when the button is clicked. And if you look at the play sound that's already built in to each of these buttons, it's the same sound that it makes for each button click, regardless of which button you're clicking. All right, so I have 4 lines on line 19 through 22 that I already know I want to add to an update screen function. It tells me right here in line 18 with this update screen comment. All right, so these things all need to be updated regardless of what button we click on. All right, so again, we're going to go down to the bottom of our program and put in the block to declare a function. Again, I'm going to call this one update screen because that is what it is doing. All right, within our update screen function, again, I'm going to switch to text mode. And we are going to copy lines 19 through lines 22 because this is all of the code that should be included in our update screen function. All right, so I just copied it and pasted it into my new update screen function down here. All right, and I'm going to switch back to block mode. All right, and I did remove those from my cup button. So now if I reset and run it, okay, when I click on my cup button, nothing happens. My variables are updated. If I were to add watchers for these variables, it would show that my total water in my cups consumed is changing, but it's not changing on the screen because I have moved all of that code into a new function and I haven't called it yet, which is why we have this yellow triangle. Update screen is defined, but it's not called in our program. All right, so I'm going to replace those 4 lines of code that I pulled out of the cup button with a call to this new update screen function. All right, so now that I have that function call in there, when I run it, okay, it is making the noise and updating our cups and water ounces values. All right, so that is working as intended. All right, so what we need to do is make our bottle button and our running button and our wait button all work. The first thing I'm going to do is completely take out all of these play sound blocks because I put a play sound block into my update screen function and I don't need it to play the sound twice. All right, that's going to be part of our update screen function. So we don't need to have any play sounds other than the one in our update screen function down here on line 43, now that I've taken all those other lines out. All right, I know I'm going to need to call this update screen function in each one of my on events. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put those in here. And we're going to name all of those function calls that I just added update screen. And I'm putting it at the bottom of my function because you know, the bottom of the on event because you know there's something else we're going to need to do here. All right, so I have my calls to update screen. All right, when I click on run, right, our cups button was already working. We know that one's working. All right, and then when I click on the bottle, right, it's making the noise, but nothing's changing on the screen. Same with running, same with weightlifting. And that is because we still need to do our variable updates, right? So we need to increase our cups consumed and increase our total water for the bottle button. We need to update those variables. And then we need to decrease our total water and add to our workouts for the running and the weightlifting buttons. All right, so those need to have variable updates in them before we do our update screen. All right, so let's look at our bottle first, okay? So if we follow the same kind of format for our cup button, we know we're going to need to increase our cups consumed. All right, so we're going to put in a assign a variable block up here for cups consumed. Oops, cups consumed. All right, and it's going to be our existing value for cups consumed plus this time, all right, up here it's adding 1. And I'm actually going to make it add 4 for the bottle because a bottle has 32 ounces of water in it. And we know 1 cup of water is equal to 8 ounces. So 32 ounces is equal to 4 cups of water. So each time I drink a bottle of water, I'm actually drinking 4 cups of water. So instead of increasing our cups consumed by 1 here, I'm going to increase it by 4 because each bottle of water consists of 4 cups of water. All right, so we increase our cups consumed, and then we also need to increase our total water drank. So we're going to put in another assign a variable block here. And this one is going to be for our total water. And it's going to take our existing total water count and again add, instead of cup this time on line 16, it's total water plus cup. This time it should be our total water plus bottle because that is the button we've clicked on. All right, so our total water plus bottle is going to be what we update here. I am just going to go ahead and put in some comments here as well. I just like to, increase cups consumed here. And then we're also going to put in a comment for this one, which is increase total water drink. All right, just so we know what things are doing. Makes it a little easier. And then one final comment in here I'm going to put in for updating the screen. All right. So now our total water and our total cups consumed should be changing, and our screen should be updating when we click on the bottle button. So if I reset it and run it just to test this one part, okay, we see our cup count did increase by 4, which is what we specified, and it did increase by 32 ounces, which is what we have in a bottle of water. All right, so we are increasing. We can click on it a few times, and it still keeps increasing with the appropriate amounts. All right, so the bottle button is now working. So then we need to work on our running and our weightlifting buttons. All right, we already have the update screens in there, so we know that those screen elements will update once we get our variables updating. And we still have 2 variables that we're going to need to update for running and weights. We don't need to increase our cups consumed because we're not drinking any water. So we're not drinking any cups of water when we're running and working out. With weightlifting, right? What we are increasing is our total number of workouts. So if I run, that's 1 workout. If I weightlift, that's 1 workout. All right. So we have these variables up here, right? We have a variable for workouts that it's initially set to 0. So I need to update my variable for workouts. Okay, so I'm going to do that in my running button. So workouts is going to be equal to my current number of workouts plus 1, right? This is just a counter pattern again. So we're adding 1 each time we do a running workout. And I'm doing the exact same thing for weightlifting. Okay, my workouts is going to be equal to my existing workouts plus 1. I have an error because I misspelled workouts right here. So if I can spell it correctly, we should be good. All right, so now we have our workout count increasing by 1, whether we click on running or weightlifting. Both are workouts. Both are going to increase our workout count by 1. And then we also need to update our total water. But when we're working out, obviously we are consuming water, right? Our water is evaporating out of us in the form of sweat as we work out. So we need to decrease our total water count instead of increase our total water count. Okay, so we're still taking this total water variable, but this time instead of increasing, we are just going to decrease. So we're going to be using minus here. All right, so it's our total water. All right, we're going to still take the value stored in total water and subtract running from it for our running workout, right? Our running workout up here on line 7 for our variable running subtracts 24 ounces of water. All right, and then we're going to do the same for our weightlifting, right? We need to subtract from our total water for the amount for weightlifting. So when we get to weightlifting, our button here, we need to do a variable update for our total water, again, is going to be equal to our total water minus weights, I think is the variable name. Weights? Yeah, weights with an S. All right, so that should subtract our total water, and then we update the screen with those values. So when I reset and run the program, all right, this time when I click on running, it subtracts 24 ounces of water and adds 1 to my workout count. And if I click on weightlifting, it subtracts 16 ounces of water and adds 1 to my total workout count. All right, so it is updating the screen appropriately, and it is updating our variables and displaying that correctly as well. All right, so last thing you would maybe want to do is add some comments to indicate what each of these lines of code are doing, like we did for the previous 2 buttons. But I feel confident that you can get that in yourself. So that is going to be it for Bubble 8C. Let's go ahead and look at Bubble 9, which is just an informational bubble. All right, so the last bubble we're covering here is Bubble 9, which is just an informational bubble about when you should make a function. And this is talking about not like when in the code. Like, obviously, you create a function when you have repeated code. But this is talking about when, during the process of coding an app, should you incorporate a function. So, of course, you might never create a function. Your code is going to be difficult to read and difficult to debug because you'll probably have lots of repeated code. So never creating functions is not ideal. You could create your functions after you've written your code. This is probably what you're going to initially do if you don't have a whole lot of confidence with coding. It might be kind of hard to predict where your repeated code is going to be before you've actually written your program. So once you've fully written your program and you don't have any functions in it, at that point you would go through, look for any of those repeated code blocks, and then incorporate that into a function. You could also incorporate creating your functions, writing your functions during the coding process, right? So you're in the middle of coding. Maybe you have like 1 or 2 buttons coded already, and by the 3rd button, you're like, oh, wait, I have like code that's repeating in each of these button clicks. So maybe I should create a function to handle all of that repeating code. So, like, during the process of coding, you've realized, let's put this function in here to help. And then the other option, of course, would just be before you even start coding. So if you're doing proper planning of your app, which really all of you should be, because you want to plan what you need to do for your app before you start building it. That's what the project guides are for. You want to plan out where you're going to need functions before you even start writing your first line of code, right? If you have an app that you know is going to have to update the screen regularly based on various button clicks, right? You should know already that you need to put in a function to update the screen because the same updates are going to need to be made regardless of what button you click, right? So if I have 5 buttons on my app and all of those are controlling different counts of things that need to be tracked on the screen somewhere, right? Rather than writing, let's say, 3 or 4 lines of code for each of those 5 buttons, I can put 3 or 4 lines of code in a function and then just call those functions 5 times for each 5 button. So with good planning, right, you can identify places where you're likely to use that repeated code and just pre-plan to have those functions in there already. So basically, if you're putting your functions in before coding, during your coding, or after you've finished coding, any of those is acceptable. But please use functions. Don't just never use functions, right? In some of our previous bubbles, we saw how useful it is, right? Especially like if we're talking about that basketball stats app. I don't want to have to rewrite like 20 lines of code for each of those buttons to show the appropriate elements or hide the appropriate elements or call that conditional up, right? I don't want to have to write that for every single button. I just want to put in a function because it's going to make it a lot easier when I have that many buttons on the screen that are controlling those stats. So that's the final note on functions. Make sure you are incorporating them from here on out into your coding. And Bubble 10 is up to you. That's your check for understanding question. So make sure you get that completed if your teacher is requiring it. And otherwise, that's it for this video. So I'll see you guys next time.